What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Have a bit of a friend crush on Andrew Lee, who is another Asian American anarchist leaning writer like myself, and is another person who is a guest on the podcast, but is way more well-spoken than I and should probably have a podcast of their own. On Substack, Andrew wrote a timely piece called The End of Protest that basically asks questions that I know I'm asking and a lot of my friends are asking about, how do we plan our protests to best win in our movements? Because usually we're not just protesting for the sake of protesting. We actually do want to win, as much as I believe in protest as a way that you can really connect with other like-minded people out there and skill build as you're planning a protest. It's very hard to measure the success when you're doing movement work. What is a win? I think it's always helpful to keep trying to hone things when we are planning and organizing. And if you got anything positive out of this episode, please consider going to patreon.com/San Francisco, helping out myself and our editor, Tofu, to pay our bills. I love doing this podcast and would do it regardless of whether or not people want to throw down for a membership, but it does help keep the episodes rolling out regularly. Thank you so much for helping us out in that way, people that can afford it. And thank you all for listening. We were just talking before I pressed record about how we actually met in 2015 at the International Hotel, which was like an early BLM benefit, I want to say. I remember we had some like Asian artists. I feel like there was some breakdancing involved.
That sounds right. Yeah.
But yeah, stoked to have Andrew X. Lee, author of Defying Displacement and also author of an excellent Substack that is semi-weekly, including a recent post framed conversation around protests with relation to like direct action. But first I wanted to ask about your time in the Bay Area. Now you're back in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I lived in the city for a second. I was in Oakland for a minute. I spent several years in San Jose, where I organized with my coworkers at a tech cafeteria. Then I was part of the crew of folks that were fighting the Google development in downtown San Jose that led to the creation of the first community land trust in the South Bay.
Oh,
so
dope.
I love the Bay. I love the folks. I got to work alongside and learn from there. I would be there if I didn't get priced out.
Yeah. And that's, what your book is about. People should check that out. Defying Displacement. I know that Philadelphia is kind of getting as expensive in some ways. And like around the university, there's been a lot of like organizing going on in Philly to stop some of the gentrification projects down there.
Yeah, it's bad. So like, the crazy thing is like, in the Bay, of course, like in San Jose, whenever folks were making demands of the government, they would say, oh, what can we do? It's like the most expensive city in the United States. Of course, we can't fix houselessness. Of course, we can't stabilize the rent prices. Of course, we can't do anything about the housing crisis. Now I'm in Philly, and when people make demands about the housing crisis here, the government's like, well, of course we couldn't do anything about that. We're the poorest major city in the United States. Which really makes you think. It really makes you think. Obviously, these are both very unique places, but there's so much of the same forms of exploitation and displacement going on, like in cities around the country and across the world. We recently had a successful campaign to stop Philadelphia's Chinatown, one of the oldest remaining Chinatowns in the country, from getting turned into the parking lots and bars outside an inconveniently located downtown basketball arena. But there are so many similarities in the patterns of how communities are targeted and exploited. And it just the narrative and the justifications just change a little bit.
Yeah, it's a problem. And I feel that the real estate industry here has done a great job of trying to export some of its strategies, like around like YIMBYism, for example, to other places, unfortunately. But we are here to talk about your recent piece that is over at your Substack. And in it, you are talking about the idea of protest and the meaning of protest. I was wondering, maybe we should start by like framing for people how like giant recent protests actually have been in the US, whether you know it or not, because the corporate media has done a great job of sort of burying a lot of this information.
Yeah, I mean, there is active, ongoing organizing on so many fronts right now. It's just not getting attention. Climate resistance, trans liberation and defense, access to abortion, the Palestine solidarity movement, even the sort of like liberal anti-Tesla protests. Those folks wrecked a major car manufacturer, right? Those stocks are like toxic now, right?
Yeah.
A report came out this week that surveyed Tesla drivers, and 50% of them said their cars had been targeted for being Teslas, right?
It's amazing.
So yeah, taking down a major American car manufacturer, like that's something. But I take people's point. We haven't seen the same sort of like explosive outrage that we did at the beginning of the first Trump administration.
Right.
And I think that there's a few pieces to that. I mean, I do think a lot of the responsibility lies with the electoral left by not like the electoral left didn't present a viable alternative to Trumpian authoritarian nationalism. And their messaging was, if you don't turn out and vote for Kamala Harris, everything is lost, and did not have a plan B.
Yeah.
So I think that really demobilized people, just like the election of Biden demobilized people in 2020, right? That's like the function of the electoral liberal left is to take this popular energy and focus it on the stupidest stuff imaginable, right? So people have this question. It's like, why aren't people out in the street? Why aren't people protesting? We're descending into authoritarianism. Why aren't people making these demands? Mm-hmm. And I think something that we need to consider is if we really are descending into authoritarianism, which we are, the more authoritarian a system is, the less and less meaningful or impactful that protest is. Like, that's kind of the definition of an authoritarian government. It's a government that doesn't care about protest, that's insulated itself from democratic critique. Mm-hmm. If the most responsive government is one that changes course every time someone raises an issue, the most authoritarian government is the one that, doesn't really care what people think or how people are voicing opposition. It's insulated itself from all of that. And so we have stuff like Kristi Noem in CCOT in El Salvador doing photo ops in a concentration camp, right? We don't need to publicize the horrors of the administration because they are gloating in them, saying, hey, this is inhumane, this is unconstitutional, this is not respectful of people's rights. They're going to say, yeah, we know. That's the point. That's why it's great. So I think now if we're going to be calling for more protests, we need to take a step back and think about what protest actually is and think about what the other modalities of collective action are that could help us get out of this mess.
Yeah. And I mean, as you mentioned, there are cases where protest seems to have, a very easy, measurable effect, like with the Tesla protests. I think that today's conversation, we are talking in like a larger sense around global issues that people are protesting around. I think that a lot of, local protests almost necessarily because we are space-wise very close to the politicians that we might be targeting or the businesses that we might be targeting. Locally based protests, I think still have, pretty measurable success rates. I think they can, versus protesting Trump. Is he listening? Is he kind of feeding on negative energy that people are putting into protesting him? Either way, it's not leading to positive results. And in your piece, you write that in the protests since 2020, the George Floyd protests, quote, the ruling class responded by providing precisely zero major concessions. In fact, bipartisan consensus hardened around law and order policing, deportation, and funding Israeli genocide. And, I can't agree more. That brings us to the big question behind the episode today, which is, what is the point of protest from your point of view?
So my piece is called The End of Protest, and I was kind of scared to put it out there because I was worried people would think I'm arguing for giving up. I'm arguing for an end of collective, organized oppositional activity, which is not my position in the least. But when we look at collective, organized, oppositional political activity, protest is just one flavor of that. So when we are protesting, we are asking or demanding that someone in authority do something or stop doing something or doing something differently, right? We're going to the boss, the president, the CEO, and saying, we are gonna keep making your life uncomfortable until you do this thing differently. So strategically, there have to be two components of a successful protest campaign. One, the person needs to have the power to fulfill our demands. And two, we need to be able to marshal enough leverage to induce them or convince them to do what we want them to do, right? We need both of those elements for a protest to be strategically effective. There is a mentality that some folks have where it's like, you just got to speak truth to power, no matter the cost, no matter the chances of success. And I think while those people may be individually morally courageous, that is a politically noxious viewpoint. If we want to build movements centered on the most oppressed communities and the most directly affected people, if we are asking people in those communities to spend their time for free coming to a march, coming to a demonstration, risking arrest or state violence or worse, we had better not be wasting people's times. We had better not be wasting people's time. And if we are tilting at windmills, we are wasting people's time. And there may be people who have the resources and the time and the privilege to spend doing that, but it is not respectful of ourselves, of our communities, of our comrades to be asking folks to do something if there isn't at least an outside chance of real success. And that is the component that gets drained away definitionally in authoritarian systems. You have ruling elites who use various mechanisms to insulate themselves from popular pressure, such that protest becomes less and less effective.
Yeah, the energy kind of drains. I mean, I do think that the process of, organizing a protest, like community building, it can teach you skills that maybe you didn't have before. There's so many roles where people can plug in to protest, from negotiating with the police, that are skills that you might not naturally have, that you all of a sudden have to learn as you're organizing a protest. Certainly, you're meeting people that have perhaps like similar values to yourself that you might not have met otherwise. Like, there are upsides, I do think, even in cases where the outcome isn't getting your demand met. But I totally take your point. Like, I think it feels like diminishing returns when you're asking people to show up time and again to protest over an issue where the person who has the power to make the change clearly is not paying attention and is maybe purposefully trying to not pay attention. In the piece, though, I think the title, as you mentioned, could signal like, oh, this is going to be another like piece about nihilism. I don't think it is. I think that it's actually a really, hopeful piece. And you bring in the concept of direct action. Could you sort of define direct action opposed to just protest for people?
The way that people often use the term direct action refers to a sort of more militant protest. And I think that's not quite correct. I think we lose something when we use direct action to just mean protest of a certain intensity, or protests where people get arrested, or protests that involve civil disobedience, or property destruction. I think the way that we can think usefully about direct action is that if protest is asking or demanding that authority does something, direct action is organizing people to just do the thing themselves, official permission be damned, right? So David Graeber's example is, if your community needs a well, you can go and demand that the city or the state or the federal government build you a well. And whatever tactics you use to get them to build the well, it's still protest, right? If you're carrying picket signs or writing letters or flipping over cop cars, whatever you're doing to get the state to build you the well is protest. Direct action is organizing your neighbors to go build the well. So anything from well building to popular revolution, directly stopping arms shipments to Israel, these are all varieties of direct action. And that is a modality of organized resistance that does not depend on our adversaries in power being susceptible to public pressure.
Yes, absolutely. One of the ways that you can measure success of a protest is coverage by the media. And so this is a bit of a different lane from, the piece that you wrote. Media coverage of protests, as huge as they are, even on social media, because we know that some of these algorithms on TikTok or Instagram will deplatform, shadow ban, whatever you want to call it, accounts that are doing too much in the way of posting about protest. And it's not necessarily because there's not a hunger to learn about the politics of other people in your area who are out there, but it's a very intentional decision by these companies to deplatform people for having, in particular, like left politics. And so here in the Bay Area, we have had, I know only because like I feel like I'm maybe uniquely plugged in certain ways, certainly not all. Like I don't know all of the things that are going on as far as direct actions from a leftist, point of view, but people are blocking roads to the Travis Air Force Base, which we know has sent arms to Israel. Early on, after October 7th, there was like a anarchist flooding of an IOF fundraiser in the Bay Area. We've had these incredible bridge blockades where like all of the bridges in the Bay Area were blockaded at once, and the amount of organizing that it takes to do that, I mean, it's a lot of organizing. So in a recent episode, which we'll link to in the show notes, had some friends on to talk about the culture of secrecy around left organizing, which can sometimes maybe overstate the secrecy around left organizing needed to get an action off the ground or make sure that people are relatively safe. The problem that we were dealing with in that episode, we were talking about how do we get our message out, basically, while feeling safe, and recognizing that historically there have been all of these ops of the left that have come out and, tried to counter-organize in an attempt to keep security around people that are involved. There's like sort of an immediate reaction of like, we don't talk to the media. We don't want to get our message out on social media. I was wondering if you noticed this as well in left organizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really got to think of these things as tools, right?
Yeah.
Like publicity, mass media, social media, these are tools. Security culture and privacy is also a tool. And we got to see, like, depending on what we're doing, what makes the most sense, right? Does publicizing this action increase its effectiveness? Yeah, I do think that there can be this like purity culture around engaging with mass media, and I don't think that that's always justified. It's sort of like the bad opposite of like folks who go to their first protest and they're like live streaming when the cops are coming.
Right.
Like
there's that.
like now
too.
is
Yeah.
not the time. That's a bad tool for this moment. You're gonna get tear gassed. I think that like this is a sort of like mirror image of that. That sometimes it's like what's gonna happen if you write a press release, right? Like what what's the worst that could happen?
Like the CIA is gonna jump out of the wall and take you to the clink.
I mean, I never want to undersell the importance of security culture and safety for folks doing actions that require such things.
Yeah.
I do think that sometimes when we're talking about security culture, we start talking as if we are up against like a group of elite super soldiers who have like, and it's like, I know that's not true because I've met police officers. Like I've met police officers in my life.
Yeah.
And that's to quote the president, they aren't sending their best. Right? I think it's like we gotta have like a real analysis of the situation we're in and think of it as like a real cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Publicizing stuff that might be slightly less than legal will not help you. Keeping stuff secret that can pull people in could very much help you. I think the thing that we need to keep in mind is like it's very easy if you're interested to find evidence for why things are terrible. Like if you want to just see videos of like humanitarian catastrophes 24/7 in your feed, you very much can. The algorithm will provide that to you. What is much harder to find is like folks doing something about it. Sometimes that opacity is very necessary. But if it isn't, I think like there's a lot of folks who understand full well how messed up a lot of stuff is. What they don't understand is that there is a potential role for them in doing something about it. This idea of like that activists are like a certain type of people. It's like your day job. Like, you know, you're an activist because you write it on your like tax return or something.
Yes.
Right? Like activists are like this separate class of people who we could critique or we could applaud, but it doesn't have anything to do with us. Which is why for so many people, like the only reason we got involved in political work is because our friend invited us in, right? The main way people get plugged into stuff is their friend invited them. So like if we aren't going to invite more people in, like it's not because people are apathetic. It's not because people are ill-informed. It's because no one has invited that person in.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's a really good point. And it's almost like, during this time when people admit to having so few friends and like, you know, maybe there's fewer ways for them to get hooked into movements, as well as the idea that you're talking about, like that you have to be like uniquely skilled to be part of the movement, to be an activist, and to not make the occasional mistake or be looked at as like cringe because you didn't know exactly how the consensus process worked in some group. I think there just needs to be like more gray space, term that I use maybe a little too much. But
like it would be really hard to pull people into organizing if the big problem was that everyone already had too many friends, right? If there were all these think pieces about like the male friendliness epidemic, like why do young men have so many friends? They can't keep any of their social commitments because they are too friendly. Like then it's like, well, you probably don't have time to come to this meeting. But we know that folks are looking for connection.
Yeah.
We know that we have an entire media ecosystem that makes it very easy for you to see horrifying stuff at home doom scrolling, and makes it very hard People can get really like activated and really agitated, but don't have an outlet to do anything about it. What excuse is there for us to not try to grow our movements and to invite folks in?
Yeah, and I didn't include this in the questions that I sent over, so we can skip. But like as people are picking and choosing, given limits of time around social networks that we see in 2025, like real life social networks, not social media related social networks, are there some things that we could leave people with around like when they're deciding and picking and choosing between actions or movements that they're getting involved with, like to move them towards ones that have a better chance of measurable success?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the biggest thing is to get involved with something.
Yeah.
Right? Get involved with something. And if it's not a good fit for you, it's easier to switch to something else once you get over that first hurdle.
Yeah.
I think it depends a lot on like where people are and what the actual context that they surround themselves is. Like there's a lot of movements where it's like the cause is great, but if everyone working on that cause in your city kind of sucks, maybe you shouldn't waste your time, right? I think in the broader strategic picture, right, it's like we want to pick fights that we can win. And that should not mean limiting ourselves to small liberal reforms. And it shouldn't mean us tilting at windmills, right? Something that I think a lot about when thinking about political possibility is in 2020, when folks burned down a police station in Minneapolis, they did a poll like the next day. And in the contest between fire and a police station, most Americans were on the side of fire. Most Americans were like, yeah, it was justified that they burned down that cop shop. And I think if you had told anyone just a month before that would be possible in the contemporary United States, I think people would think you were crazy. Like that was a very outside fight that people won, right? Didn't win in a larger sustaining sense, but in terms of like how people reacted in that moment, that was a fight that was able to be won. So I'm not saying that we limit ourselves to like moderate reforms, because again, the whole problem with authoritarianism is these reforms get less and less likely. But do I think I'm going to change J.D. Vance's mind? No. Do I think that there is some level of public protest that will cause Donald Trump to not be a ghoul? No. So I think in that sense, like we need to be working on the stuff that we can actually win for our communities to really affect transformative liberatory change for our communities, for our neighbors, for our kids, for our elders, for our friends and family. And that can look like a lot of things, right? There are folks who are distributing emergency contraception in states where it's no longer available because you can just do that, right? There are folks who are decommodifying housing and taking it off the private market because you can just do that. There are people blocking weapons shipments to Israel and sheltering migrants because you can just do that. None of these things are easy. None of these things are without risk. But these are things that organized collectives of people can and are doing today to prevent people's lives from getting measurably worse or ended. That's what I'm talking about. That's the actual concrete stuff that we can take action with today. The only thing we can't do is get permission from the Democrats to do it.
Yeah, I feel like people need to take that energy that I just got from you. And like, if people aren't involved with like a group that meets regularly to try to work on an issue that you care deeply about, like that is the place to start, is just try it. And if it doesn't work, there is another group out there.
You know, I heard a lot of folks who have fallen back into this narrative of like, oh, things are hopeless, right? There could never be social change in the United States. Americans are all bought off, or we're too lazy or stupid. And don't get me wrong, we are very lazy and stupid, right? But again, 5 years from the largest social movement in US history. 5 years. 5 years from people burning down a police station and a majority of Americans, of all people, being in support, right? This is very recent history. On the heels of the largest Palestine solidarity movement in the history of the United States and Israel in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. We have seen huge, huge movements. So the idea that, well, now it's too late, right? Now history stopped and we'll never see that again. I don't think that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
But the time to prepare for those moments of rupture is not when they're happening. It's now, right? Now's the time to form crews. Now's the time to start building relationships of trust and mutual care. Now's the time to start meeting people and inviting them in. Because when everyone's out in the street, people are going to be ready to swoop in to mislead those movements, right? The NGOs, the electoralists, the authoritarian, quote unquote, socialists, they're ready. They're organized. They're ready to bring out their stupid little placards and their mass-produced signs and get people to register to vote or whatever they do, right? If we want an actual liberatory alternative that involves people, actually having control over their lives and livelihood and us living on a habitable planet for our grandkids, we also need to be ready when those moments of rupture emerge.
Yeah. How can people follow your work? I mean, I know how, and it will be in the show notes also, but could you let people know?
Yeah, my Substack is called In Struggle. I'm on social media at @AndrewLeeX. And my book, if you want to check it out, which is about a lot of examples of folks doing just this around the country and around the world, creating real material transformative change to preserve and improve their communities under threat of gentrification. My book is called Defying Displacement, and it's out from AK Press and the Institute for Meronek Studies.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And yeah, I would love to have you on again to talk more about these authoritarian socialist groups as well.
Happy to do it.
All right, sweet. Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco. I am Toshio Meronek, and my co-producer is Tofu Estolas. Patreon.com/SadFrancisco is where you can find our past episodes and transcripts, and it's also where you can help us out with a donation. And if you do, it comes with some benefits like getting the episodes a few days early, and our gratitude for allowing us to keep making this podcast, which we love to do. See you next time in Sad Francisco.